Welcome back to the Rhetoric Prof stream. Today we are on a new computer, new camera, new format. It's all new today, right here on the stream. So I hope you're ready for also trying out something new today. I also have two different drinks, a delicious Melograna Arancia drink from San Pellegrino. They make great drinks. And a second pot of coffee, really. So I'm trying to monitor my frames per second here to see how that's going to go. And looks like it's a little choppy right now. So hopefully it'll figure out the new, because I'm on a new laptop. Let me turn this down a little bit. Because I'm on a new laptop, might not be as good in terms of quality. I'm still figuring out all of the settings necessary here on the new laptop, but I think overall, in the end, it will probably be an improvement. But do let me know if you're in the chat and the quality is not up to snuff. I can try to make on-the-fly adjustments here to see how to make it a little bit better for you. But yeah, so the point of this format, what we're going to do is we're going to look at some actual arguments made in today's paper, the New York Times, the paper of record, as it's often called, the Gray Lady. And I'm using my institutional account to look at this, so there's one downside to that, which is that most of these opinion articles use lots of hyperlinks to refer to all evidence, and for whatever reason, my university does not have the license to allow me to access the links. I just have the plain text. So that's a caveat to say we don't know exactly everything that they're going to be referencing in terms of the evidence that they have here. But these are three arguments, three opinions put forward that are about very different things. One of them's about virtual reality on your face. Is it coming or not? One of them is about, should bison be killed in the national parks? And the last one is about, should we trust the military more or less, or what's the problems with having lots of trust in the military? These are all arguments focused and made for an American audience. We're going to go through them one by one, and the idea here is you and I together kind of looking for moments in the arguments that we might question or doubt or try to interpret, try to see and evaluate whether the claim that they've made is well supported, whether it's something that we might have questions about. And this is an example of what many people are calling media literacy. What's frustrating to me about why I want to do something a little different than I've been doing before, and I might do these in the future. Hopefully I'll do a number of them, maybe weekly. We'll see how it goes. It's the first one. Hard to make promises. Is a lot of times when people are, if you're in a class and you say, oh, let's do some media literacy. Let's learn about information and data literacy. That sounds great. I really support that as an idea, except most of the time what you learn is who to trust. It's a question about which authority to select. What authorities are telling you the truth and which are not. And what is that based on? Really just whatever the person who's teaching you thinks is the right kind of authority. So I think that one of the problems that we have with the supposedly critical thinking is it seems it's all about authority. So how can we have a critical way of looking at arguments that treats them as complex and part of an ecosystem of other arguments? And I'm not going to say that I have totally mastered this. This is something that no one's ever going to master. It's something to be critical. So it's something we'll do together and look at potential ways that these arguments might be evaluated beyond just the question of, oh, it's in the New York Times. That must be a good place. That must be authoritative, so we should trust it. That doesn't really do very much. I don't know why that's any more critical or not. One of the first ones we'll do here, virtual reality will conquer your face. I'm going to go ahead and say maybe we needed an editor on the title. Well, I'm not here just to throw shade. But it's funny that it's by this guy, Farhad Manjoo, because he goes by they, them pronouns, even though he is a cisgender man. I learned this from his Wikipedia page. So I will try to use his pronouns, they. One of the things that they wrote a whole book about called True Enough. Let's go to the very beginning of the book so you can see it. Learning to Live in a Post-Fact Society. Is his whole program, this whole book, is about supposedly how can we become more information literate and how do we deal with the fact that people don't care about facts anymore. So, and he is one of these people that I think just says you should just trust the right authorities. That's really what it's all about. We're going to look at his article that he wrote today, and you can see some information up here about where it's from. We're just going to look really at the article and see what we make of the argument. So let me know as we're going along what if you think of something like, oh, that sounds true to me, or that rings true with my experience. If you're like, wait, that's weird, what does that mean? We can talk about it, and I'll talk about what I think about what is going on in this particular argument. So he starts out by saying, it is difficult to avoid sounding vulgar somehow when discussing the future of facial computing. Okay. There is something inescapably crude, isn't there, about the prospect of everyone walking around with computers on our faces. So here, I think I don't necessarily know that I agree or disagree. I don't know. I think he's really trying to get an attitude. He's trying to display an attitude of like, we don't want this kind of tech to get in the way of things. It's kind of strange because he's a technology reporter that he would have that attitude. We'll see what that's really his attitude. But here I think a lot of the opening of this particular argument is kind of establishing an attitude. He's trying to say, look, I'm on your side. I get that you might not have open arms to embrace facial computing, whatever that means. But I wonder if really the audience has enough information to even have an attitude yet. So I think one thing I would say is, what are we really imagining here? What is a face computer? What are we imagining? Is it Google Glass? Is it something else? And yet I suspect the world may adopt face computers anyway, and not long from now, perhaps even within the coming decade. Okay, so a lot of what we're going to be evaluating in this article is these predictions that he makes. And this is something that you'll find a lot if you read technology journalism. Technology journalism is filled, sorry about that, I forgot that it comes up with a little thing. Technology journalism is filled with predictions. Now, predictions are, of course, claims. They're arguments, or they can be arguments if they're supported. What's the reason to believe that something is going to happen in the future would be the first thing we should ask. So that's something I'm now prepared to ask. What are the reasons that you think it's going to happen within the coming decade? Why should we accept that? People in tech have been wondering what might succeed smartphones as the next dominant computing platform. For a long time, I've thought that nothing would, that phones would remain our primary computers for this foreseeable future. In the past few months, though, I've begun to face the fact that our faces are in trouble. So he's presenting this as like a reconsideration. He's like, no, I thought that we would have, everyone is going to stay with the smartphone. That's the end of technology, at least for the foreseeable future. But something made him change his mind. So we'd be expecting that he would then talk about what made him change his mind. Hey, what's up, aliens? He's just deliberately describing details with a dystopian disposition. I think you're kind of right, and which is especially weird. And by the way, welcome back to the stream, aliens. It's been a while. Good to hear from you. I'm doing it more in your kind of time zone, I think, friendly streaming format on the weekend here. And it's weird because it seems like he wants us to kind of accept it. But he's like, oh, I'm kind of grudgingly going along with this. But, it's kind of... I don't love the writing here already, I have to say. But what do you make of these claims about what will happen in the future? He says, in the past few months. Well, what happened in the past few months? He should tell us, right? The face computer is coming. Brace yourself for an onslaught of smart glasses, virtual reality headsets, and other devices that connect your eyes to the digital world. Okay, once again, a claim. We still haven't had support for this. Why does he think this is coming? So here's what he's going to say. So far, there have only been a few such machines. Most famously, Google's failed digital specs, Google Glass. And so I assume, aliens, you probably know what Google Glass is, but if someone's watching this later on YouTube and maybe you're a little younger, Google Glass was something that people would wear on their faces, and it had like a little camera up here. So it was pretty conspicuous, and it didn't really take off. It was very expensive. It broke easily. It had a lot of problems with it. Facebook and Ray-Ban recently unveiled camera-enabled sunglasses. Snap, which makes Snapchat, also has such a device. The sunglasses let you photograph life in the moment, from your eye's point of view, when you're building sandcastles at the beach with your kids. You can tap your specs to capture the memory while you're living it, rather than reaching for your phone with sandy fingers. Okay, so far, he's given us two examples of things. Remember, he's trying to give us evidence, I think, that this is something that's going to come in the near future. He's seen stuff in the last few months that's made him reconsider. Both the Ray-Ban and the Snaps, is that facial computing, or is it really just a camera in your Glasses. Is that some innovative piece of technology? Is that even really what Google Glass was? Because one of the things about Google Glass is it's supposed to kind of be interacting with your eye movements. Is that really the same thing? Is it like a UI that's integrated with your eye movements? He doesn't really say anything about that. It's just that there's cameras in your glasses. So is this really a big new thing, or is this kind of hype? Face computing doesn't even mean anything. Yeah, I'm kind of wondering what it means. So this is kind of my first question here about this claim, where he's like, get ready for facial computing. What is facial computing? So far, the examples we've had is something that failed, Google Glass, and 2 instances of photograph technologies and companies that have introduced ways of taking photographs with your glasses. Is that worth calling it a new name? Why would he describe it like that? Because he's a hack. That's why. This guy I don't particularly, I don't like them too much. But anyway, the sunglasses let you, okay, we did that already. Okay, so you don't have to touch your phone to take a picture. Great. Facebook and computing are making virtual reality headsets too. So now he's changed from camera and glasses to virtual reality headsets. Those seem like completely different technologies to me, right? A photograph is of what we're seeing if it's in our glasses, ostensibly, something similar to that. Virtual reality changes the reality that we're seeing. Why is this the same technology? And also, there are already plenty of virtual reality headsets, the Oculus Rift, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what's new about this? So he's kind of lumping things together that don't seem to have any obvious connection other than that you put them on your face and that they have digital components to them. And also there's plenty of these things that already exist. Okay, let's keep going though. These function as powerful personal computers mounted to your eyes, creating an enveloping digital experience. Video games and movies surround you, the real world replaced by the machine. Okay, nothing new there though. Though none of these devices has been a huge success, the tech that powers face-mounted computers is getting good quite fast. Okay, here's another claim, right? The tech is getting good. So you would expect some support for the claim. What is making the tech good? What do you support that claim with? But then it gets followed up with is another claim. It is probably only a few years until a face computer hits big. Perhaps when Apple releases the one it has been reported to be working on. Why? Why is the tech getting good? Why do you think that? Mounted to your head, more likely. Yeah, mounted to your eyes would be pretty bad, right? That's like the thing that happens in A Clockwork Orange. So, it probably is only a few years. That's a claim, right? That should have evidence. So we've gone from smartphones are going to be the permanent technology of the future to like within 10 years, then to within the next few years. It's his own article, and he's kind of changing these time frames of when we'll get the next big face computer. No evidence has been offered. He says, perhaps when Apple releases the one it has been reported to work on. Why perhaps when Apple? It sounds to me kind of like an ad for a brand. It sounds to me like he has a lot of faith in the Apple brand. And he's like, if Apple's doing it, it must be good. Is that a good argument? Okay, let's keep going. New York Times. There are enormous social, cultural, and legal reasons to worry about face computers becoming ubiquitous. Social, cultural, and legal. Wow. Such devices could turn your eyes into constantly recording dash cams, superimpose Instagram-y toxicity over your real-life conversations, and add a layer of reality-bending computer graphics to everything you say. So again, we've gone from nothing being changed, photographic technology and glasses, to virtual reality changing the reality around you. What he's talking about, which is what Google Glass attempted to do, is the kind of integration of a graphical UI, of a user interface, with your normal, if corrected, through your glasses, vision. There's no evidence that any of that is in the works. If you supported it with the examples of other places where Apple has led the adoption of new technologies, that would be great, aliens, right? If Apple is shown that they can kind of create new innovative technologies in a number of places, the report that Apple is working on something, maybe just reminding us of those situations. Okay, the iPhone, sure, that was one. But he doesn't make that claim. He kind of just lets it dangle, lets you have to kind of make it yourself. I forgot that the timeout on this is a little too fast, so, hopefully. Yeah, like AirPods. I think that's a good example. You should be the editor for the New York Times opinion page. Just be like, why don't you give us some evidence? Like the AirPods, yeah. It's funny, though, the AirPods are something that people really didn't totally love. Because I know I had to, when I got the new laptop here, I was concerned that it would have an auxiliary jack for headphones that I have. Because once you have AirPods, you can get rid of the jacks, and then you have proprietary technology that's kind of baked in to what you get with your other piece of proprietary technology, right? So even those kinds of things they're kind of innovations, but also ways of kind of capturing intellectual property value through making people on board a whole bunch of technology at once. It doesn't help that they're being developed by some of the most intrusive, least trustworthy corporations in the world. So again, if he wanted us before to believe his claims on the basis of the reputation of Apple, now he's saying that they're intrusive and untrustworthy corporations. So I don't know what I'm supposed to think at this point. Really, I think that unfortunately, this argument probably is just someone who's kind of lazily writing something before a deadline. This might not be worthy of that much critique because it's just not well written. But let's keep going anyway. But if creepiness posted a fatal impediment to success in the tech industry, we wouldn't have smartphones or Facebook. What do you think about that? Are those good examples of what's creepy in the tech industry? Surely there are things about Facebook that I think are creepy, and if you know the origin story of Facebook, it's pretty creepy. Smartphones. There's lots of things that might be creepy about them, but is the technology itself creepy? People tend to be concerned about the microphones on their smartphones, listening to them, or their location data being sent or being kind of collected. Yeah, I mean, everything is creepy. Might be smartphones themselves, nah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to evaluate that one. It kind of seems like an odd pair to put together, smartphones or Facebook. So here's the thing about face computers. With the right design, when their components inevitably become small and powerful enough, these machines make computing much more visceral and accessible. I don't know what he means by visceral there. Visceral means like your viscera is your guts. Your guts. So it's more visceral, meaning like it's more intuitive, I guess, is what he means, but kind of a strange way to put that, which most likely means more irresistible, too. I worry about the sudden inevitability of face computers. That has happened with smartphones. They could become ubiquitous before society begins to appreciate they might be altering everything. More realistic? Maybe, I don't know about realistic. But it's funny that we've moved from smartphones are the end of technology to facial computing might be coming in the next 10 years, to facial computing might be coming in the next couple of years, to facial computing we have to be concerned about it coming because it's going to be so good and so irresistible that people won't realize it's going to change everything about the way that we live. We still don't have a single example of it except for Google Glass, which seems to be like what he's imagining, which he admits was a colossal failure. I'm not convinced I need to worry about this at all, based on his argument so far. I say this having used plenty of pretty bad face computers over the past few years. Even the worst of them suggested a compelling goal. Face computers is such an awkward phrase. Face computers promise to improve the two things we most often do on our phones: watch stuff and take pictures of our stuff. And take pictures of stuff. I don't know about you. I mean, that might be true that might be what most people do most on their phones, but I think I probably spend far more time reading stuff on my phone than I do watching stuff on my phone or taking pictures of stuff. That might just be me. I don't know. But reading on my phone, I'm not like proud of it. It might be just reading Twitter or texts or whatever it is. But I spend a lot more time reading stuff on my phone than watching it. I don't know. How about you? Aliens, do you what is the thing you do most on your phone? This is becoming an ASMR channel as I drink my coffee right into the mic. Yeah, I bet you know a lot more about this. Yeah, I guess I watch some YouTube. I use the app because I have an Android phone, NewPipe, which allows you to watch ad-free YouTube content. I guess I do a fair bit of that as well. Watch stuff and pay. Okay. A computer you can always see paired with a camera always watching whatever you are. Isn't it obvious how such a device might fit in during the age of YouTube and TikTok? Now, here I honestly am not sure. Oh, you talking on Clubhouse? Okay, yeah. That's one where you kind of like it's a video recording thing as you talk. It's like a chat, but with video. I don't use that one, but I think I've heard about it. I don't know it. I don't know what he's trying to say here. A computer you can always see paired with a camera always watching whatever you are. Oh, it's audio chat. Okay. Always watching whatever you are. How would that help with TikTok and YouTube? I'm not sure I totally understand, to be honest, that one. Okay. Face computers also mitigate two of the touchscreen's phone's biggest shortcomings, the touch and the screen. My phone claims to help me, and yet it demands constant attention from my fingers and my eyes. In this economy? In this economy. So, I mean, I think he's trying to be funny, but it's just like the joke didn't totally land, because the idea that it would be that the phone requiring you to interact with it through your hands makes it like harder to do other stuff, I guess. He talks about having sandy fingers sure. I sometimes, one of the things I do use my phone for is I'll be watching a recipe as I'm cooking, and sometimes my hands will be greasy or something as I'm cooking, and I'm like, oh, pause, and I need to go back. And I understand that there are things about that technology that is. How does he plan to interact with face computers? That's the question. It seems he doesn't talk at all about what that might look like. I think this piece would be better if it was more openly speculative, rather than being about like, oh, what the facial computing paradigm might look like. Be like, here's an opportunity that the companies might have to address a problem that we all experience with a new technology. But because he's trying to kind of be cagey about it, as if he's an insider, and he's like, oh, something's in the pipe, something is in the works at Apple, like he knows something. I don't think he does. I really don't think that he does. Those NDAs are powerful things, and I'm not sure even the New York Times tech reporting journalist would. I'm sorry, I said I was going to use his pronouns. I forgot his pronouns are they. I'm not sure that they do know anything about this. So anyway, so it makes the argument kind of unclear of really what he's trying to claim. And how does he plan to interact with the face computers? If it's like Google Glass that you do with your eyes, this is one of the things people didn't like about it. Because people, you're trying to talk to someone and they're moving their eyes around all the time. It makes people feel anxious and like someone's acting suspiciously. You don't really know what they're doing or what they're interacting with. At least when someone's on their phone, that might be annoying, but like you can see it. You know that they're on their phone. Yeah. So I'm not sure that this really is well thought out in terms of how it will help us, or in any respect. This is the best pitch for the face computer. It lets you get digital information more flexibly than you can on any other device. Another claim. We still haven't had any of these claims have had support at all. Why would it be more flexible on a face computer? It seems to me that you're kind of locked in to reading things in one way or accessing information in one way if you're on a face computer, because with a laptop, let's say, you have lots of modes of interacting with information. Visual, audio, click, gesture, bioscanning. There's lots of different kinds of things you can do. Why would this be better? I don't understand. I really just don't even know what he's imagining. But on the one hand, these machines, this format isn't supposed to just beating up on bad articles, but there'll be, I think some of the other ones are better. This one just is, this guy, because he wrote that book, True Enough, I couldn't pass him by when I saw his name. I was like, okay, we got to talk about his piece. And it's bad, as I would expect it to be. On the one hand, these machines can conjure experiences that are much more intense than on any other device. Another claim, no support. Oh, let's say maybe this is support. With a face computer, you're not just watching videos online. You're inhabiting them in a way that feels embodied. Okay, so that would be support. If that were true, that would be support that it would be more intense. It feels embodied. Well, why would it feel embodied? One thing that's like, it seems to me, with the phone, you might have haptic feedback on some kinds of, or even like with a Switch, I think you get haptic feedback. I don't know if I want haptic feedback on my face. So will it feel more embodied or not? It seems like it needs more to be proven. You wouldn't choose to consume content on something like eyeglasses. It would always be limited by being transparent and being so close to your face and having... Yeah, it sounds extremely uncomfortable. I mean, even with virtual reality, which he's saying is a kind of facial computing, lots of people experience like nausea or dizziness, even motion sickness from wearing those kinds of things. And I imagine that it's kind of worth it for that immersive experience in a video game, but just to kind of watch something that you it is still kind of two-dimensional. It sounds like the media would need to adapt to that too to make it feel like it was immersive in some other way. He hasn't really talked about that. Yeah. I think that's a really good point, aliens. VR make you feel disembodied. I think that's probably closer to the truth. Not more embodied. It's kind of this out-of-body experience, right? Yeah. Auxiliary devices. Yeah. Yeah. You should write a letter to the editor of the New York Times and be like, tell him why he's got this all wrong. But they'll only, even if they publish it, they'll only give you like 200 words. He gets like 1,400 or whatever. So. You're inhabiting the way that feels a body too. Okay. Recently, I've been hooked on Facebook's Oculus Quest 2, the light, portable, virtual reality headset released late last year. Nobody watches TikTok on their smartwatch. I mean, that... I can imagine someone at the club being like, "Had you seen this new latest TikTok?" Yeah. Yeah, I mean... Yeah, he just... I'd be willing to hear any evidence of why someone would do this, but he just doesn't support any of these claims. I think it's part of to kind of broaden the scope here a little bit, a lot of what happens in some kinds of tech journalism. There's good tech journalism, there definitely is. But there's a lot of tech journalism that is, especially when it's being written under a deadline by someone who's a columnist, so they write a regular piece, that their mode of production, of writing, factors into what they write. And they tend to want access to tech insiders, so they tend to write things that are kind of positive, maybe hyped up a little bit. I also can't help but be a little bit suspicious that some of these things might not have... I don't want to make the accusation too pointed, but sometimes that financial speculation and hopes that people will read an article and then see that as a signal to invest in a certain part of a certain kind of portfolio will help their own gains. But you're not really saying anything too specific, so you can't really be accused of it. So I don't know. There might be lots of reasons. It might be a combination of laziness, might be a combination of hoping to make some money, might be a combination of not having much to say, but the kind of hyped up tech journalism is something that it's really easy to see when you just say, well, what's the claim that they're making? What's the support that they're giving? They give lots of claims. They give very little support. Very basic kind of critical reading will show you what's the hype here. The very little support for the claims. I'm not usually a gamer, but the Quest 2 has a large library of immersive titles that I found entrancing. Among them, a rock climbing game whose perilous realism made my hands clammy. There's no real content or novel opinion what they're saying here, but I think that's very common. Yeah, unfortunately it is. Which is why are we going so deep on this if it's very common? But, bear with me. If this is really an experience of being embodied, with rock climbing, I'm not a rock climber myself. I don't think I would want clammy hands when I'm climbing rocks. I think I would want my hands to be dry to climb things. So that is perilous realism because it would be dangerous to have really sweaty palms while you're climbing, I think. Just an idea. Okay. Virtual reality will conquer gaming because it is unmatched at affecting your entire physical experience. When you ride a virtual reality roller coaster, your stomach drops just like on the real thing. Okay. They're almost certainly making that up. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that was a little bit of purple. It wasn't even purple prose. It was purple line, purple thread they wanted to put in there. Even ordinary videos gain from the VR experience. I found that scrolling through high-resolution nature videos on YouTube's virtual reality app is a wonderful way to remember what it was like when we were allowed to leave our houses. I wonder where he lives that he's like in the middle. He's seeing he's seeing toucans. Okay. At least here I'm seeing he's giving some kind of value a little bit to what he's experiencing. The entire physical experience from only your vision. Yeah, again, I mean, it seems like the haptic feedback part of lots of video game experiences, even with controllers, where it seems like it's a really obvious, important part of that feeling like it's a full experience. And he doesn't really talk about that. It's an it's an incidental effect of kind of imagining yourself in this world that you might have other experiences. He says when you're taking the the roller coaster, your stomach drops. But is that maybe just because you're having motion sickness? Because you're, again, disembodied from your visual field to what your body's actually doing. That's one of the reasons people can have motion sickness. Yeah, it's also very repetitive. Yep. Yeah, exactly. This went through an editing process, What can we say? Virtual reality another claim, here we go. Virtual reality will conquer gaming because it is unmatched at affecting your entire physical experience. Oh, we just did this one. But let's talk about it. What is he not considering as potential counterclaims? Well, virtual reality already exists. There is a market for it. Why is it not widely adopted? I think that the obvious thing is it's expensive. It's expensive. Many people who game have enough money to buy a console or to buy some games, but they might not have enough money to go out and buy a virtual reality headset. So it's not really accessible. It would seem like if your whole article is going to be about the wide adoption of these technologies, that the cost of the technology might factor in at least in one of the paragraphs in your 1400. Maybe he does. I see a $sign down below, but it seems like this might be the opportune time to get into that, right? That it will conquer gaming despite the cost. Okay. Mainly we'll use these things for fun, but there's a chance VR catches on for other uses too. Nutty as it sounds, I have been meditating in VR. That's like the quintessential tech reporter line. That's so good. Picking some peaceful virtual spot and sitting there silently, just feeling the world around me. Yes, it's super dorky. It's also terrifically relaxing. Okay. Computers conquered our lives during the pandemic, but it's the rare Zoom meeting that doesn't feel lo-fi, awkward, and distant. Talking to people over VR is natural by comparison. Okay, this would be okay. But he hasn't talked about talking to people over VR as there is VR chat, and I think there's some interesting stuff that people have done with VR chat. But the VR chat that I've seen, there's someone on YouTube who goes around interviewing people. They're in these absurd, part of the interest of it is people in these interviews often disclose very personal things about themselves. Interesting, very sad sometimes very disturbing stuff. And they're in the avatars of being like Pikachu or I keep just thinking of other Pokemon, but various kinds of anime characters or things like that. So is that natural by comparison to a Zoom meeting? Because he hasn't given me another way to imagine what VR chat looks like than what I know, I have to go on that. And that seems not to be the case for me. Because the headset lets the digital world fully engulf your senses, it has the ironic effect of liberating you from the ever-present sensation that all of your interactions are being mediated by machines. Yes, surreal is definitely a word I would use to describe it. I don't know if you've ever seen those videos. I forget the name of the YouTube channel that does them. It's pretty good. He goes around and he interviews people and he cuts these clips where people will talk about... I saw one about a guy who was addicted to whippets, which is nitrous oxide, and you could hear him doing them in the interview and then like being gone for 30 seconds, then coming back and talking about how terrible this addiction was. It was quite disturbing, but also effective. But the guy was like Link from Zelda or something during the whole thing and like falling over. It was very surreal, yeah. Okay. So yeah, he thinks that this is going to make it feel more immediate and that we won't feel the mediation when we're wearing a VR headset. It seems doubtful to me. You're not going to experience the weight of the VR headset. You're not going to experience the strangeness of the way that your movement is kind of tracked to an avatar. Is that going to be that's going to feel seamless for everyone? It seems like, depending on the kind of body that you have, also if you have a body that has mobility issues or something, there are going to be lots of things that are going to make it feel more or less mediated for people with different body experiences. But we're certainly not thinking about that here. I still don't think VR is for everyone. The experience is so immersive that it often feels impractical. VR shuts off the offline world entirely, demanding all your attention. Who has time to drop everything to climb a virtual mountain? Wait until Facebook starts showing VR ads. Yeah, I mean, I'm not on Facebook, so it would surprise me if they weren't already doing that. Maybe they're not, but... Oh, you mean like the ads are actually in VR? That's what I think is going to happen. I think that's the future. If this does happen, it's just that you have immersive ads. That's what you get. you get an ad that kind of like speaks to you. I mean, we kind of already have that, even if you have like an Amazon Alexa, or I don't know. There's so much of our people are kind of producing entertainment content on TikTok or on Instagram or YouTube or whatever, that oftentimes is ads, like reviewing videos, unboxing videos. Even sometimes I don't think people are voluntarily making ads, but it's just kind of all of our cultural production kind of, since it tends to be around pop cultural products, ends up being often like in the form of an advertisement. So yeah, I don't know if I want to be immersed and feel totally unmediated while I'm in an ad. That doesn't sound that great to me, but to each their own. And so tech companies have been experimenting with less immersive tech machines for your face, what some call augmented reality. This is the world that Google imagined when it started selling its glass spectacles in 2014. As a matter of technology, glass was a marvel. Google had stuffed a display, speakers, and a camera into a machine built only slightly obtrusively into eyeglass frames. One knock on glass was that it didn't do a whole lot to justify its price. Okay. Now we're talking about it. It could snap short videos and display digital tidbits like the weather in the corner of your visual frame for $1,500. Yeah. So it basically, it could give you the weather. Okay. It's a marvel, though. I mean, it might be. Yet function is rarely an obvious impediment in wearable tech. Wristwatches only tell time, and sunglasses only tell the world you're awesome. Oh, God. In some ways, not doing too much was the point of glass. I don't know. I remember it being hyped up, kind of the way the Segway was, of being a revolutionary technology, that it was going to change how we interact with the world and each other. Maybe I'm misremembering it. Maybe that's a false memory. The specs promised to offer you digital information more discreetly than your phone could. It imagined a visual field one day enriched by information, the latest headlines and your incoming text superimposed over your walk home. A cable news chyron on the lower third of your life. Spouse says milk gone. Blame Biden. Okay, again, he's trying to be cute, I think there. Okay. The big problem with Google Glass was not technical but social. Despite the company's best efforts to make Glass cool, the people who first got the device tended to be of a certain type. Overconfident, entitled rich tech guys. Soon they earned a derisive nickname, Glassholes, and at that point the device was done for. Notice that he hasn't said whether he was one of these people who was one of the first adopters. He's not totally claimed that, but it does seem like it might have been one of the things that he got as the New York Times tech reporter. A lot has changed since Glass's release. Cameras and mobile processors are smaller and more powerful. Now, glass-like tech can be built into spectacles without much sacrifice in style. Okay, so at least there we have a claim that has some support. That because the processors are smaller and the cameras are smaller, the tech is smaller, it won't be as obtrusive. Oh my gosh, having one... And now it feels like a relief. Maybe this was the whole effect he was going for. I'm going to have tons of claims and not support any of them, so that when they finally do, it will feel really like a great relief. It's not to say that it's still a good argument, because I don't know that the only problem with the people feeling that others were glass holes was that they thought their style was bad. I think it's more that there's a kind of differential of power that gets introduced when someone has a camera pointed right at your face all the time and you don't know whether it's on or off. That might be part of what makes people feel a little put off by facial computing. There is also far less social opprobrium attached to wearable tech. Earbuds and smartwatches are not just for rich nerds. But again, I think it has to do so much with the camera, which is not the same as the earbuds. Earbuds are kind of like, I'm plugged away from the world. I'm not interacting with you, right? People always talk about this. I'm going to put on my earbuds on the bus so like no one will talk to me. I'm not even listening to music. Whereas when someone holds up a camera, even on their smartphone to you, starts going like this, it feels a little aggressive. You don't know what they're going to be doing with that. It actually has to be obtrusive thanks to physics. You don't project an image directly into the lens of your glass and focus on it with your eyes. That's a really good point. Yeah, so, okay. There's lots of problems we could say here. I don't want to be all negative. Hopefully I can find something positive to say about this guy's article. And for a lot of people, especially young people, there is little separation anymore between the online world and the offline world, suggesting potentially huge demand for glasses that fix the internet to your eyeballs. I also wonder if the pandemic might have eased people's inhibitions about wearing something on their faces. Okay. I had a feeling he might go here. So because we've all been wearing masks, and because, of course, everyone's been super cool about it, everyone's loved that experience. There haven't been any massive demonstrations or protests against it. Everyone's feeling great about it. Yes, a lot of people have recoiled on face masks. Okay, fair enough. You anticipated that. But a lot more are now quite comfortable both wearing them and seeing others wear them. The thing is, that's true. But does that support the claim that people that will ease people's inhibitions about wearing something on their faces? Is that the way that people's feelings work? Is that they're like, oh, there's something on my face. I think it kind of matters what the purpose of that thing on your face is. People who have, like myself, become more comfortable wearing a mask on their face is partly because you recognize that it's social importance, helping stop spread a virus that could potentially kill people. You're not really getting much benefit out of the mask other than the safety that's providing you and mostly other people. And so it's a kind of social buy-in to the mask that was what we're trying to get. Here it's not really, it's more about it's a consumer tech product. And my comfort of seeing someone else wear a camera on their face is going to be a different judgment than seeing someone else wear a mask on their face. Someone else is wearing a mask and say, okay, they're doing something to protect others. So it has a kind of social meaning to it that's positive. Someone wearing a camera on their face, not sure how I feel about that. Okay, to me the stage feels set in a way that recalls the period before the iPhone's release in 2007. Technology and consumer preferences are aligning. It's all lining up. You'll notice that phrase in a lot of tech reporting. Things are aligning, kind of like the planets. It's a little bit like astrology in the way that they feel like things are coming together. The perfect situation is arriving. But we're always on the brink, always on the verge. Things are always aligning. And it does seem to me that it might just be a lot of wishful thinking. People weren't happy about being recorded by the Google S. Yeah, I mean, this seems to me like should be really the first thing that you would consider when proposing this technology before even building it. Like, how is this going to affect the people that now have cameras constantly pointed in their faces? But anyway, that's maybe another longer discussion about tech development and the kinds of considerations that do or do not go into it. But remember, again, at the beginning, he was like, it's going to change our lives so much. It's going to change our lives so much, we should be concerned about it. But all of that has gone away. He's like forgotten his own objections. He's totally forgotten, but now he's like all about the hype. So it's almost like he tipped his hat to the concern, but then just forgot about it. He's like, I did it. It wasn't real. It didn't have any content to it. To me, the stage feels set in a way that recalls the period before the iPhone's release in 2007. So we predicted this at the beginning, right? When he was talked about Apple's got something in the works. And he could have made an explicit argument that just in the same way that Apple has a track record of introducing technology that then becomes an industry leader and changes people's lives, like the iPhone. This will be the same thing. But we need to know maybe a little bit more about what Apple has said about what's in the works to begin a kind of speculation about what might be being introduced here. So far, he's mostly talking about VR and photos in your glasses. Not the same thing. We're on the cusp of something big, another claim. I only hope that unlike with smartphones, this time we go slow. Smartphones became an inescapable fact of modern life long before we understood all the ways they would alter society, for better and for worse. Now as the machines march for our faces, terrible writing, let's at least keep our eyes wide open. Yeah. I don't even feel like going too much further with this because I just think it's very poorly written. So maybe it's time to go to the next one. But before I do that, I'm going to plug in my phone. But yeah, final thoughts on this, aliens. What do you think? Should you write into the New York Times? Yeah, march for our faces. That's just keep our eyes wide open. Again, it's giving me kind of Clockwork Orange vibes. I feel like my eyes are being forced to be open. I'll be back 1 second. Hold on. Yeah, the editor. The editor probably knows. Yeah, that's it, you're right. There is not a very high bar, and I can't help but wonder if I'm not sure exactly what it is. I don't know much about the sociology of the field of tech journalism. You do kind of get the sense of a certain kind of person who is drawn to that and is kind of selected for that work, but they just let them do their thing. Yeah, I think it's there's also just kind of, because it is often speculative, it's often kind of about the next big thing, that a lot of these claims can be so poorly sourced. It's just funny that this is the guy that's like, oh wow, facts are going out the window. I'm going to write a whole book about it. And it runs on hype. This is what he's doing all the time. So let's see if I can just renew this. No, I have to go back and log in again. Oh, it preserved it. Okay, so this next one is about the bison. So it'll be a very different one. So we're going from tech to ecology. So this is about a proposal to allow in United States national parks, and a specific national park, in this case, Grand Canyon National Park, to have hunters come in and cull some of the bison. If you're not aware of the history of the American bison, it was hunted almost to extinction, and the people of the plains, the American Indians who lived on the plains, for whom the bison was a very important source of food and part of a whole way of life. It was partially done as a method by the United States federal government as a way of forcibly moving and affecting Native American Indian populations, as well as, but many of these bison were hunted and just kind of left to rot. It's a very dark moment where environmental devastation and racism came together. So there is a kind of history here that's pretty dark. And that might be part of what's motivating it. The guy's name is Matthew Scully. I don't know this guy. Maybe we can quickly see if we could find out something about him. Author, journalist, speechwriter. Is this the guy? I'm going to guess that this is the guy. And he wrote Palin's acceptance speech and Melania Trump's convention speech. Conservative speechwriter. And why is he writing about the bison? Why would he be an authority on this? It seems like he wrote a book about the power of man, the suffering animals, and the call to mercy. So he's written a couple books, or a book that has something to do with animals. This is something that you also might kind of start to get a sense of if you are critically reading opinion pages, is many times the people that have the bylines in the opinion page, not the permanent columnists. You can imagine what that's like, but people even who are kind of coming in for one opinion aren't necessarily always, they might kind of present themselves as experts, but oftentimes they're people who have connections to the political establishment or the media establishment and have a kind of passing interest in this. Are they the best spokesperson for this particular cause? Hard to say, hard to evaluate. But we don't want to evaluate it just on the fact that we see him in this picture. We want to evaluate on the basis of the argument. So let's take a look and jump into the argument. Okay, he's writing from Phoenix. In politics, issues of true importance, aren't always the ones that consume our attention. What's true importance? So in one of the major topics in rhetoric that I would say is something that can never be established by fact is importance. We always have to make judgments about what's important and what's not. We're doing this constantly, sometimes consciously, sometimes not. But what would be the thing that would be truly important? Whatever the person believes is truly important is usually the answer. My candidate for the most underrated of all public concerns is the treatment of animals, an issue as revealing as any about our character and sense of fairness. If you want hard evidence to track the moral progress of humanity, watch how we deal with other creatures who are defenseless against our power and will. So he's saying that we don't give enough attention to the treatment of animals. That may be true. It depends on what you think is sufficient treatment. It seems to me, though, I often hear from students and from people and in the media a lot of concern for the treatment of animals for people who don't have the same concerns about the treatment of human beings. People are very upset about the negative reputation that, let's say, pit bulls have, who are not so concerned about the homeless population. So I wonder whether that's the most underrated of all public concerns. It seems like there's quite a bit of, it's nearing 1 a.m. Well, thanks for stopping by, aliens. Thanks for stopping by. I'll be around. I'll keep doing these, I think. But I'm just trying it out. Hopefully the technical side of this was okay because I'm trying out new equipment. So you can let me know if you think I need to adjust some of my settings because this is all new equipment. I'm not really sure. So this is also a test stream. But yeah, thanks for stopping by. It was fun chatting with you, as always. Okay, case in point, he goes. Nice. The National Park Service is about to allow 12 hunters into the supposed sanctuary of Grand Canyon National Park. The hunters, selected by lottery for more than 45,000 applicants. I guess it would be pretty exciting if you're a hunter, that you would definitely apply for this, I guess, if you're in the area. You'd be like, wow, that could be cool, go hunting in the national parks. Once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We'll be allowed to kill one bison each, in what one hunting website described as a once-in-a-lifetime experience. There you go. This pilot lethal removal program, set to begin on Monday, which is this Monday, I think, apparently is the Park Service idea of rational, sober-minded conservation. Outside the world of blood sport and the game management bureaucracy, it should rightly strike most people as an appalling betrayal of trust in a national park where hunting is prohibited. So the fate of 12 bison in the coming weeks, and possibly more if this pilot program turns into a regular affair, has implications beyond the reach of the Colorado River. What will follow from this? At Rocky Mountain National Park, for instance, or Yellowstone, or elsewhere. So this might start ringing some bells for you, where you might sound like, that sounds like one of those things I learned about in a argumentation class, a logical fallacy. The slippery slope fallacy. If this happens, what could happen elsewhere? No, a slippery slope fallacy, it's not always a fallacy. It can be an inference that if one thing happens, similar things are more likely to happen. That's sometimes the case. But we want to argue for why it's the case. Why would other national parks adopt this policy just because Grand Canyon National Park did? What would be the reason? Maybe one thing is the National Park Service has many concerns, and if they see as something successful in one national park in terms of what they were, however they evaluate its success, and they say, okay, good, we can try that somewhere else. That would be a reason why it might be, but he didn't really say that. So you're left to your own inferences. The bison live on the canyon's north rim. As in Yellowstone, the herd has long presented visitors with a happy, peaceable, uplifting scene. Given the somber history of the species, what Teddy Roosevelt called the merciless and terrible annihilation of the American bison, why would anyone begrudge this herd a safe stretch of earth? So again, a kind of rhetorical question. Why would you try to take this stretch of earth away from? Well, it would be helpful, I think, at this point, to know what the arguments are for why they're doing this with the bison. And he does mention the report, and I pulled it up. It's 199 pages. I'm not going to pretend that I read all of this. But there in the report, he talks, it opens with this: the purpose of and need for the action. So it's a specific herd of bison called the House Rock Bison herd, and it's mostly spending time inside the park because the park it's not like a fence around the park. They can go in and out of the park, but they tend to spend most of their time inside the park. And the herd grew from 100 bison to between 400 and 600 that now roam the Kaitab Plateau, which you can see in the inset there, I think. I wonder if you can see this, if I'm blocking it. Yeah, I'm blocking it. Okay, let me try to move this over for a second. Kaitab Plateau. Yeah, I can't really see where. Oh, there, somewhere around here, I guess. This area. Not totally sure what it is. Okay. Where was it? It was before. And it's expected to grow to nearly 800 bison in the next 3 years, and as large as 1,200 to 1,500 animals within 10 years. Given the current bison distribution, abundance, and density, and the expected growth of the House Rock bison herd, the National Park Service is concerned about any current and potential increased impacts on park resources, such as water, vegetation, soils, and archaeological sites, and on values such as visitor experience and wilderness character. Now, this doesn't give you everything of, well, why are they concerned? What are the increased bison going to do to these various resources? I assume that they describe that. Again, I haven't read all of this, but I assume that it's in there. We're not going to get into all that at this moment, right now, because we're just evaluating this one argument from this one guy. So let's see what he goes back and says. Okay. There was a day when as many as 60 million bison ranged from the Yukon all the way to Mexico, including in northern Arizona. Here is a humble herd of some 300 or 400 bison left to enjoy refuge in a 1.2 million acre park. Now, it's funny that he says 300 or 400 bison, because we just read the estimate. It's like one of the first things in there. It's 400 to 600. I mean, again, these are all estimates, but why the change of numbers to kind of go up, make it lower? If it's so small compared to the 60 million, it is. Why not just say 400 to 600? Seems strange to me. But anyway, why can't just let them be? Oh, we can't just let them be? There's a lot of questions here. The targeted bison don't belong in a national park, but hunters do? I think that's an interesting kind of comparison of being like, who belongs, as a way of framing the argument. He's framing it as a question. I don't know if I love that, but saying, why would we be bringing in hunters? Wouldn't that, if part of the thing, as it did say in the document, part of the thing about the bison is preserving the integrity of our experience of a national park, what's more likely to disrupt that? Hunting or the bison? Having more bison? Okay, makes sense to me. Where they fail to inspire compassion, animals inspire in certain people a flair for elaborate rationalization. A flair for... Okay. Again, not great writing, but... Here the pretext for bison reduction actions, in the euphemistic parlance of the scheme, is laid out in a 2017 initial bison herd reduction environmental assessment. The document is a case study in ecological hypermanagement. A case study in ecological hypermanagement. I think I also, again, for rhetorical reasons, like this idea of hypermanagement. It is ecological, but it's kind of micromanaging. It reminds you of, in your workplace, maybe your boss is doing like too much managing. Hands off. Things would go better if you stopped managing me. And he's, in some sense, I think, making us think of those other situations that we might be more familiar with. Filled with so much fretting about the natural impacts of bison and the potential for herd expansion, that you're left wondering how the American landscape ever survived tens of millions of them. So the argument here is saying, if there were so many before, and we recognized the reduction of that to the small population it is now, as being a devastation, ecological devastation, and as I mentioned earlier, as part of a kind of racist program against the Plains Indians by the federal government, why does a few hundred here or there is that going to make any difference? They were able to tolerate it before. For such intolerable offenses as foraging, drinking, defecating, wallowing, and kicking up some dirt, these native animals are treated throughout the study as a constant disturbance, as if the ideal of management were sterile, picture-perfect scenery instead of a lived-in ecosystem. To make the bison look bad takes some work-intensive phrasing, if one is straining to give a bison hunt a scientific-sounding rationale. The creature's natural behaviors raise alarm over the potential for increasing impacts on park resources, erosion potential, soil disturbance, potential concerns about changes to local hydrology, potential damage to archaeological sites, and so on. So he's using this language from the report. We read some of it just now, and he's like, yeah, they're really, it's work-intensive phrasing. I don't know. I'm curious what you think about that, if you're here in the chat. Does that sound like a reach, the fact that there might be erosion potential from bison? The park is very big. I don't know. I don't necessarily think I have the capacity to judge whether 1,500 bison could lead to erosion potential that is, or soil disturbance that's really bad. But you see how he's reframing it as kicking up some dirt. I like that kind of ability to translate terms in terms of their attitude. He wants to kind of say it's no big deal. It's just kicking up some dirt. It's what bison naturally do. And he's comparing that to the scientific terminology, or the scientistic terminology, maybe, of something like erosion potential or soil disturbance. Which is the one that we should prefer? I don't know. Depends on what you find more persuasive. You might need more information. Are any of these dreadful developments really so bad as to warrant a bison cull? No. And hard to say without evaluating the report. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to read all 200 pages of it, but if anybody here does, let me know. I might go flip through it, though. I might look for a few words. Like let's see if I can Control F right now, erosion, and just see where that comes up. Could reduce erosion potential and the acceleration of the erosion processes. Okay, how do they measure that? Here's some of the things that they're concerned about. This is not the best way to do it, These disturbances and changes to the soil can occasionally lead to increased runoff, erosion, and compaction of soil, and potential sedimentation of surrounding water resources, which could contribute to obstruction of the natural karst drainage points and block the natural underground transport of surface water, although this has not been studied to date. So yeah, that does seem kind of to me like relatively weak evidence. Like, it could be the case. We haven't studied it. So it's like, maybe study it before you take some action in that direction. Most soils on the Kaibab Plateau have a 2-foot thick, loamy surface with many rock fragments, making them resistant to rutting and compaction, although they are still susceptible to compaction and erosion. What's the difference between the compaction with rutting and compaction and erosion, especially the topmost layers, if the level of disturbance is high? So it doesn't seem like a big concern to me. I don't know. Wind and water erosion are major concerns on the North Rim and can damage trails in areas where the grass cover is lost from both animal and human use. So if human use is part of it, it seems like adding hunters in might also contribute to it. So, okay. We could keep going through it this way. Most people are not going to read this whole document, but there are ways to kind of evaluate some of the claims by looking for keywords and seeing what the claims they make about those are. They also talk about non-lethal culling. Corral sites would locate at least 200 feet from water sources and sinkholes to minimize the potential for vegetation disturbance, soil compaction. So they could also do this in non-lethal ways. And they talk about this in other parts of the article. I did look at that. And this is the lethal culling part of the plan that is being argued against here. Yet if the herd reduction assessment, relocation of the entire herd, fertility control, and other non-lethal alternatives are dismissed as impractical or not considered, even though some bison in the recent past were captured and relocated anyway, in coordination with Native American tribes, leaving one to wonder, why couldn't all of them be removed to a place where they wouldn't be harassed or shot at? Or why not control the herd in the contraceptive vaccine PZP, administered by marksmen directing darts at the females, which has contained bison elsewhere? A more hysterical version of the Park Service trumped-up case comes from the Arizona Congressman Paul Gosar, who had a legislative hand in all this. Disturbed that bison were wreaking havoc, causing devastation, threatening no less than the wonder that is the Grand Canyon, Mr. Gosar called on the government to empower hunters, and they were in a 2019 law that allows the Interior Secretary to use qualified volunteers to reduce the size of a wildlife population within a national park. So something that's helpful here is kind of giving me the sense of, okay, well, what might be the political motivations involved in this happening at all? And this gives us some sense of why that might be. Otherwise, it can be confusing. Even if you can see won't they just have a survival of the fittest if resources drop? I'm not sure exactly what you mean. I mean, I think part of it is the question of, should they continue to procreate? Could you give them a contraceptive shot? Could you move them somewhere, or do you have to kill them? Yeah, why interfere at all? This is kind of a good question. It's still not totally clear to me, but people in Arizona are concerned about it. Why is they concerned about it? Let's see. Let's read a little further. Hunters already are empowered under a corresponding program of the Arizona Game and Fish Department, which not only authorizes killing in areas close to the park, but also offers coaching in technique. In recent years, hundreds of bison near the park have been killed by hunters. The spirit of the program can be seen in a bison hunter packet the state furnishes to participants. The trick, the packet explains, is to lie in wait by water holes and shoot them when they're thirsty and make sure they don't retreat to safety in Grand Canyon National Park. Shoot them when they're thirsty. Notice how he's bringing in, he's not using it as a moment where he's like, this is what's going to make people, he's kind of presenting an emotionally charged part of this as just the plain facts. So that's what they're telling them to do. I think that that's a better way of presenting it often, is to present that kind of emotional moment. This guy was a speechwriter after all. That emotional moment as something that's kind of disguised as just telling it as it is. Shoot them when they're thirsty. The calling thing is more of a Thanos argument, and the contradictory thing is like a Dan Brown Inferno argument. I don't know Dan Brown's Inferno too well. I mean, I know who Dan Brown is, but I don't know the book. What's the Inferno argument? I guess Dan Brown's still writing stuff. I mean, the Da Vinci Code was huge, but I did not follow the Dan Brown career too much. Though it comes up sometimes because when I'm not on Twitch talking about Bison, I study the Renaissance, and occasionally like people will ask questions that I'm like, oh, I think that's coming from a Dan Brown novel. They make people infertile, like a quarter of the population. Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, microplastics might be doing that to us. So that might be another piece that we read in another stream. Oh, okay. Infertility, a recessive gene. Got it. Okay, that's how we get to a quarter. Interesting. Okay. Interesting. Dan Brown. Yeah, I mean, I guess I wish it was a little bit more clear in the argument that he's making. What's the kind of interest behind this that he thinks is pushing it? It's hard to tell. This is why in the American legal system, you have opening and closing arguments. Opening arguments are not evidence. So why should we have people say anything before there's evidence? Well, you might argue that they shouldn't. But it's difficult for us to evaluate evidence without some kind of narrative that includes people's motivations. So I want to know more about why the Arizona congressman is concerned about this. Is he just kind of pro-hunter, pro-gun, thinks this is going to help be popular with his constituents, help him in an election? What might it be? Don't leave me hanging. Okay. Hunters already are empowered under a corresponding program of the Arizona Game and Fish Department, which not only authorizes killing in areas close to the park, but also offers coaching in technique. Oh, we already did this part. Right. Shoot them when they're thirsty. This tawdry business explains why the bison have been congregating in the park for longer periods, adding to those impacts that trouble the Park Service. The creatures are smart enough to realize that leaving the park means danger. So see what he's doing. He has kind of three arguments. One is, we've had such a huge bison population in the past, there's no reason to do this. There's no reason to cull the bison. Even if we might argue, well, the ecology has changed or things like that. He's like, okay, but it's nowhere even close. We had 60 million and now we're talking about hundreds. The second argument is, okay, even if we thought it was a good idea, we don't have to do it with lethal means. We could do it with non-lethal means. But the final one is to saying that what they've already been doing, that it doesn't actually work. It actually makes the bison learn that hunting is happening. It's going to make them congregate even closer. So the creatures are smart enough to realize that leaving the park means danger. Wildlife management in this case might be trying to solve problems of its own making, and to make credible the Park Service's own argument that this is not a hunt, but merely a supervised lethal removal, again, those kind of translation of terms. The last thing it should have done is solicit applications from skilled volunteers, who no doubt included trophy hunters. I don't know, that's pretty persuasive to me. Has he compared this to the culling they do in other continents? I've heard of a kangaroo culling in some places. He might not. That might be an argument that would be more helpful to his opponents, I would guess. We'd be like, because often when something's well established, like, oh yeah, we've been culling the kangaroo in Canberra National Park for years. This is very common here. That might be something that the kind of hunting lobby would say. So I don't know if that would help his argument. But I think that it would be an interesting part of this debate where we kind of have other voices involved. And there are lots of programs like this. In fact, there were many in the United States. Some of them involved were the bad ones, like the ones that were used to kill all of the bison in the first place. So, yeah. An agency whose very logo features a bison, in keeping with its protective mission, should have found another way. The National Park Service is overseen by the Department of the Interior, and we can hope that Secretary Deb Haaland, who, as she reported on Twitter, recently delighted in the sight of free-roaming bison, will see the cold and contrived design of the plan and call off the hunt. It represents the worst elements of Interior Department policy in the 4 years before she arrived. Notice that kind of like little symbolic flourish. You have a bison in your logo, and you're sponsoring a bison hunt. He's like really putting it to your values, what you use to represent yourselves. Who better, indeed, than our first Native American Interior Secretary to extend leniency to these animals in recognition of their travails and all the rank abuses of the 19th century? Fairness, honor, and charity all counsel her to set the Park Service straight and to spare the bison from further grief. So he's drawing a continuity between the bison of now and the 19th century. Makes sense. You know, it's a rhetorical move, but it makes sense. And he's kind of putting it in these moral terms, saying it's only fair. We've done so much harm to them. We should make it easier for them now. Thinking about it as a wrong rather than a question of the success or effectiveness of a policy. It's a moral question. At the Grand Canyon and elsewhere, these creatures are a welcome presence and a sight to admire, living reminders that America has put the days of merciless and terrible annihilation firmly in our past. That's the end of the article. Yeah. I was thinking I was going to do another one. This one actually seems like it might be the most substantive one. That one, I thought, that argument, I have to say, I think this argument was, I don't know what I think about this guy, Matthew Scully, but you can see why he was a speechwriter. He has lots of different ideas about how to kind of turn an argument. He doesn't necessarily say what they should do is, for instance, use the contraceptive technology, but he's saying, if you wanted to do that, there are better ways than what you are doing. So he manages to have multiple lines of attack on the argument. He thinks that they shouldn't do this at all, but even if they should do it, they shouldn't do it as a hunt. And so he gets many things in there. Yeah, it felt more like a speech. Besides the excessive number of rhetorical questions, his arguments make sense. He can't really support them in more detail without making it too long. That's definitely always a question of how much space do you get. And I think his probably main objective here is to put this on the radar, which is why he argues with this thing of true importance. And he frames it as a question about the treatment of animals. And so he says, we don't care enough about the treatment of animals. My sense is, now that I've read the whole argument, is that he wants people to say, I care about the treatment of animals. And so then they're going to kind of lean into the article. And so you could have framed it as in a lot of other ways. A question of ecological policy, a question about the forest service of the United States, how we should deal with population growth. By framing it as a question of the treatment of animals, it allows him to kind of make this historical and moral turn part of the same argument. Yeah, it's definitely a moral reframing. I think you're totally right. Totally right. Yeah. So, okay, one more here for this inaugural stream of the Argument Clinic. A reference to the Monty Python sketch, if you've never seen it. Okay. So this one is about the downside of high trust in the military. And I did read through this one ahead of time. And I think it's worth noting who these people are before we read it, as we have done in the past couple. Jessica D. Blankshane is an associate professor at the U.S. Naval War College. And Max Z. Margulies is the director of research and an assistant professor at the Modern War Institute at West Point. So they're both professors at the military colleges of the United States. Okay, so keep that in mind as we read. So they're saying the downside of high trust in the military. That's the name of the argument. With the United States military withdrawn from Afghanistan, we are faced with many pressing questions. Among them, how and why did we engage in war for so long with so little to show for it? A common explanation blames the American public for inattention and indifference to the war's lack of progress. In fact, I feel like I have seen that argument being made in the New York Times opinion page. At the heart of this alleged public apathy is an ever-widening gap between the military and the society it serves. When the public is almost totally insulated from the human and financial costs of war, it has no reason to care. Call this the military is at war, Americans are at the mall theory. For those who hold this view, they're not saying that it's their view, right? They're saying for those who hold this view, the solution is to make Americans pay the costs of war more directly through a draft or explicit war taxes or both. We're not persuaded by this argument. Note, all views here are our own and do not represent the official views or positions of our employers. That's for sure, I bet. First, the perception that most Americans are at the mall is not new. Off the base, it was as if there was no war taking place, one veteran said of Korea, America's original forgotten war. I hate that they say that this is the forgotten war. There's so many other wars that America has fought in that people are not even aware of, but again, that's a stream for another time. I read that part. The war wasn't very popular, and no one wanted to hear anything about it. Second, policymakers are unlikely to implement policies like a war tax or a draft in a way that imposes substantial political costs, as the American experience in Vietnam demonstrated. Though there is movement now, there's kind of cage rattling about bringing the draft back, which will be relevant to what goes on at the end of this article. Finally, the logic of this argument, which shames the public while putting the military on a pedestal, may actually be making things worse. So they make 3 points here. Let's just review them. This isn't unique. It's non-unique, as you might say in debate language. This is not a unique argument to the present moment. This has been true. There's a draft during Korea. People still didn't care. American public still didn't care about it. Second, it's unlikely to happen anyway. Politicians don't want to implement a draft or tax. It's not popular because it's not popular. And finally, and this one they don't totally flesh out here, we shouldn't be shaming the public. The kind of manner is wrong. In some sense, they go through a bunch of arguments that in rhetorical stasis theory we would go through, which is a question of about its effectiveness, its uniqueness, and also its manner. All these kinds of questions might come up in certain versions of something like stasis theory. We see a different civil-military relations problem, one that American experience in Afghanistan and the past 20 years of American foreign intervention have made painfully clear. The fundamental problem is a yawning gap between trust in the military and trust in civilian institutions. So what they're doing is kind of adding in a term to talk about, it's not just a gap between the military and the civilian institutions. It's a question of how trust is allocated. Let's see where this goes. For decades, polls have shown that Americans, this is probably where there's like a link in the original article that I don't have in the plain text version. Oh, well, this is how we're doing the database. For decades, polls have shown that Americans trust the military more than most other institutions. One recent survey found that Americans were significantly more likely to say that the military has done a good job in Afghanistan over the past 20 years than to say the same of any relevant presidential administration. That may have been partly due to the fact that people did not know what was happening in Afghanistan and were not paying attention, nor was it being really covered by the media, who were supposedly going to inform them about the war. They kind of stopped talking about it largely after 2005. This trust gap suggests at least a partial explanation for the longevity of the war in Afghanistan. As Phil Clay, a U.S. Marine veteran, argued in 2018, one reason the public doesn't critically engage with military policy is that civilians have been convinced that they should defer to those with military experience, and that criticizing the wars is akin to failing to support the troops. So notice that we use the passive voice here. The public has been convinced. Civilians have been convinced. By whom? Who was doing this? The New York Times. But also the media establishment and the political establishment broadly together often made very righteous arguments in this way. So by putting something in the passive voice, you get the ability to talk about something without naming the agent that did it. And this is one of the effects of the passive voice, why probably in your classes you would be told not to use the passive voice, to make it active, because we want to know who did it. But this is one of the reasons why people use the passive voice, to avoid those questions about who did the convincing. It's true that public opinion polling has suggested that the war in Afghanistan has not been popular for some time, but it does not show that the public has overwhelmingly turned against the war. Okay, what does it mean? If it's not popular, it's just not overwhelming? What do they mean by that? Even if Americans were not enthusiastic about the war, they did not impose those preferences on elected officials or organize large-scale protest. Well, here we might pause for a moment and say, they did not impose those preferences on elected officials. It's not really possible to impose those preferences on elected officials if all of your elected officials voted for the Afghanistan invasion and tended to support it, with the exception of, I think it was Barbara Jordan. So this is one of these questions about what if we think about democracy only in this relationship between a voting public, which is not even close to the whole public or the whole voting eligible public in the United States, and the elected officials, is it the public's agency when the people who are running for a particular point of view don't run on an issue? Is there a possibility of democratic politics or advocacy around that issue? You could say there could be activism, there could be pressure put on it. What would that look like in terms of the Afghanistan? Well, there actually were people at the beginning who were pushing back on this, and none of them were invited on mainstream media. So you'd say the media might also kind of be shaping the possibility for certain kinds of democratic political. Oh, I think there's like something, it's talking about democratic politics. There's like a car outside my house, maybe like playing some kind of political message. I'm not totally sure what it is. We just had our election here, so I'm not sure what it is. I'll go check it out later if it's still happening. Might be a protest. Okay. Anyway, this is consistent with the detrimental effects of the trust gap. Excessive deference to the military has made Americans less willing to weigh in on public debates where they believe they lack expertise or moral standing. This I have to say I agree with. But I think it's true about not just the military, it's true about everything in a democracy, that our deference to expertise, the deference to the people that know what is right, makes people less willing to think that there's any value in a public debate. And there's lots of people who are saying, oh, we have all, the big problem is misinformation. The big problem is that people have the wrong ideas about things. And the correction to that is to assert even more strongly who the appropriate authorities are and to try to get rid of other kinds of debate. I don't think that this is the right approach. It just doesn't work. It really doesn't work. And so we would need another way of thinking about the relationship between expertise and public discourse, which isn't one of hoping, crossing your fingers, that people believe the right things. The expertise might kind of need to be rethought itself. How do you have expertise and democratic discourse at the same time? Which would be more important? Which would you prefer or value? I think it says a lot about people's feelings about democracy. I think a lot of people, especially in the media class, tend to feel like they'd be very quick to get rid of the democratic discourse to have the expert discourse. That's my sense of it. But the post-Vietnam shift to the all-volunteer force layered new recruiting and retention incentives on top of an already large standing military. A result has been concerted efforts both to reassure Americans that such a force does not threaten civilian control by emphasizing the military's professional, apolitical nature, and to attract recruits and public support by emphasizing the special honor and status associated with military service. Now again, I know that they work for military academies, but there's definitely a branch of people who are totally on board with, they might be civilians themselves, but they're totally on board with the military having plenty of political power. There were people who were hoping, saying in American political conventions, that what happened in Myanmar, a military coup, they're like, that could happen here, and they were cheering for it, they were celebrating for it. I think one of the things that maybe is kind of lost in these kinds of questions is there's almost always a faction of people within a democratic polity who, sometimes it's a very large faction, who support the military as a political force. So in the United States, there's been a long tradition of trying to separate this out, trying to say that there's a difference between the civilian and the military, but it's always been a little blurry. We have to remember that the very first president of the United States of America was a general. General Washington. So this question of the relationship between the military and civilian control has never not been fraught. I think it's always been a kind of question that's open, and partly because there are people who are very supportive of of the military. They have a high trust. That's what they're saying is a downside. But not because they think that the military can play ball with the civilian leadership, because they think that the military leadership will put the civilian leadership in its place. That's kind of what some people want to see. Studies have found that public opinion on military and foreign policy is sensitive to perceptions of military recommendations, and that civilian leaders are willing to defer to the military when it is politically useful. So military expertise has been favored over civilian expertise, and criticism of the military has been understood to be politically acceptable. So notice how they're framing the debate here. We have too much trust in the military, which means we don't have enough trust in civilian expertise. So it's two kinds of expertise that are being framed as the alternatives. What about the non-expert part? What about the trust in democratic deliberation and democratic politics itself? Should we have, what would be the value of having trust in the non-expert discourse? What would we want from that? That's not even on the table here, in the way that I'm reading anyway. Presidential decisions about Afghanistan were often framed in terms of their accordance with military advice. For example, debate over President Barack Obama's troop surge in 2009 was shaped in part by a leak of a grim review of the situation in Afghanistan by General Stanley McChrystal. And many observers believe that in 2017, Trump's generals persuaded him to send more troops to Afghanistan. There is some evidence that military leaders and veterans are less willing than civilians to initiate use of force, but once it is engaged, prefer higher levels of it. Now, I don't know if the evidence is linked in the original article. I would like to see what that is. I would like to see it is. Unfortunately, a paywall prevents me from seeing it. I'm accessing it another way. It is not surprising that military leaders would be reluctant to give up on a mission their organization had invested so much in. But the issue is not the content of the military advice itself. There are certainly plenty of voices in civilian policy circles supporting a continued effort in Afghanistan. Yeah, there were. What does civilian policy circle entail? So one of the things that was kind of being conflated here, I think a little bit in language, is the civilian policy circle is a bunch of people within the kind of defense and security apparatus who include defense contractors, lobbyists for defense contractors, longtime politicos, their staffers. Is that an image of the public? So conflating the civilian expertise, whatever they want to call it, if they want to call it expertise, sure. Civilian policy circles with the public, I'm not sure that that's really a good image of what represents the public. Really not sure that that's the best way. So there seems to be a little bit of a kind of playing at conflation between those two things, because the public can't really be represented except through expert discourse. That's the underlying argument that I feel like is assumed here. The bigger concern is that in the context of the trust gap, this framing suggests that the public should be concerned not with evaluating the policy itself. That sounds like, evaluating it myself, but rather with whether the military gets its way. So when they were talking about evaluating the policy itself, what would that look like? Does it mean that we say, let's trust the civilian policy experts? Or does it mean that we have a kind of giant public debate about it? What would be or public discussion or discourse or referenda or whatever it might be? These are very different kinds of alternatives. Military expertise has an important place in sound policymaking. But in a democracy, it cannot be substituted for value judgments made on behalf of society by their elected leaders. So there we see again the kind of moment of conflation between the civilian and the expert, the public and the civilian expert. It's not really the public that should be evaluating the policy here. That's what they seem to be saying in the first sentence, when they say that the public should be concerned with evaluating the policy itself, but really it's on their behalf by their elected leaders. Would there be a difference? Is it possible to imagine a democracy in which, without that our deliberation and our evaluation of things doesn't happen on the basis of political representation, or even quasi-political representation with the kind of glob of policy experts who most of the time are not elected? In addition, service members and veterans have a perceived moral competence. There is a perception that the service and sacrifice mean that they have earned the right to weigh in on conflicts in a way civilians have not. But this impulse risks downplaying the importance of other forms of public service and civic engagement. These troubling trust gap trends may have far-reaching effects. When the military is seen as the most competent, trustworthy government institution, it becomes tempting to invite the military to undermine civilian control and democratic governance. This was evident in public speculation about the role the military might play in adjudicating or enforcing the 2020 presidential election, and in recent reports that largely portray General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as a check on an out-of-control president in the final days of the Trump administration. There's a lot going on here that I think is a little bit confusing, not necessarily confusing, but a little bit different. Rather than, on one hand, they might be saying that, okay, if we think of the government institution as being the military, it's the most competent, most effective, that they're going to ensure kind of the transfer of power or be a check on the Trump administration. Well, in the Mark Milley case, it's still ongoing. This leak from this kind of guy who's kind of a sensationalist journalist. People are making a lot of to-do about it, that he had some calls with his counterpart in the Chinese military. But also there were lots of people on these calls. So some of it has kind of been sensationalized, like this guy was kind of undermining the president. It's not clear that happened at all. It's not really clear that happened. So, but the other thing is, like, wouldn't the kind of ratcheting up of aggressive rhetoric about starting a war be something that maybe does involve the military? And I don't know. The appointing of the military leadership by the civilian leadership would be something that would also be part of this conversation. Because it's not like they're totally separate. Okay. So what can be done? Well, we would benefit from efforts to demystify. Okay, here's where I found the article gets very strange, in my opinion. We would benefit from efforts to demystify the military and reemphasize the role of civilian policymakers. So they haven't talked at all about the mystification of the military as part of what makes people trust it. It would seem like if people trust it, they don't feel that it's kind of hard to understand. Maybe they do, and they say, oh, well, we can't understand it, so we have to just trust what they say. But they haven't talked about that. So why would that be the solution? And then they say, and then we have to reemphasize the role of civilian policymakers. Again, not the public, not public deliberation, just politicians. And here's the way that they want to do this, which I find to be very interesting. Making military bases less isolated from their surrounding communities and more accessible to civilians. That would be a way that you would deal with people putting too much trust in the military, is inviting them onto the base. As the congressionally mandated National Commission on Military, National, and Public Service recommends. Now, that commission, I can bring up this is just the Wikipedia page here. What is this commission made of? Almost entirely people who are part of the national security apparatus or the military. And what were they trying to do? Of figuring out how to make people have a greater attitude and ethos of service, including an increased propensity for military service. It would be very strange to take the recommendations of a body appointed to make people trust and value military service more to being the answer to people trusting the military too much. And what does it have anything to do with the bases? Now, I'm not saying that there are many communities that are deeply impacted, and not just in America. American military bases all over the world. Why would inviting people onto the base, making it more accessible to civilians, for what purpose? For what purpose? This is very strange to me. Very strange recommendation at the end here of this article. The Defense Department could also do more to publicize the role of civilians in the conduct of the nation's wars. I thought the wars were the unpopular part. And if we want people to trust the civilian leadership to be able to say no to the war, that's how we began the article, remember? Why were we in Afghanistan for so long? Because we deferred too much to the military. So if we told people that in an unpopular war, there was a lot of civilian control, that would make people have more trust in the civilian leadership. I can't help but think that these recommendations do pretty much the opposite of what it seems like they're recommending. To emphasize the degree to which day-to-day experience of many military jobs is relatable to civilians. Are we trying to change the distribution of trust between military leadership and civilian leadership? Are we trying to make everyone feel like, oh, we all get along? What's really the problem here? In the long term, as difficult a challenge as it may be, we should make every effort to shore up confidence in civilian democratic institutions and to elevate other forms of public service, which can be done without denigrating military service. To me, this seems like a framework for integrating the military more deeply into the institutions, the democratic institutions, to say that they can play ball, rather than having a deference to one or another, saying, no, they're all part of the same thing. Any real solution will require political will on the part of American civilian leaders, who must publicly own the value decisions that can legitimately rest only on their shoulders, not on the shoulders of the public. So we shouldn't blame the public, because the public shouldn't make any decisions. So I find this article to be a particularly interesting one. I'm not sure. I may be being a little more suspicious than you might feel about these types of articles. But doesn't it seem strange that this whole article, kind of 85% of it, is setting up a problem. But when we get to the solutions, I mean, if you make it this far, what it's suggesting is not obviously doing the thing that at least I thought was going to be talked about, which would be like, it should be a lot easier more transparent to see how military decisions are being made. It should be, we should have, I don't know, I mean, there might be lots of other solutions of like having people trust the military too much. It seems strange to say people trust the military too much, so let's make them trust it more. Seems very strange. So anyway, that's the beginning of this format that we did today, and I hope that you will come back to future ones where we're practicing critical reasoning, critical thinking skills, which are really nothing more than looking at writing from an argumentative perspective. What kind of claims is it making? What are the things that we might doubt about those claims? What kind of evidence do they give? And if you have an article or a piece of opinion writing that you would like to see on the stream, let me know. You can send it to me here through Twitch chat, or you can leave a comment on the YouTube video. This will appear on YouTube. So thanks again, and look forward to seeing you next time on the Rhetoric Prof stream. See ya.